So we currently do Botvin life skills, and JPO does that. And
Is that the high school?
middle school?
Okay. That's, okay.
Sorry, just kidding.
Okay.
We are at the middle school, and it is not being delivered as effectively as it can be right now.
Right.
So we decided to have our superhero Sarah maybe ask them to take it off their hands, and she can put her spin on it, and that way not only would she make it amazing, but then the students will get their time with Sarah, even though they don't really need it, but they still get that time, and so maybe they're not constantly like, oh, I need Sarah, you know? And so we really want her to take that over and make it amazing.
Okay, so a couple of things I'm thinking about and wondering about.
Yes.
The social emotional competencies technical brief that we just shared with you might be a good way to start to think bigger about how we're using the SEL curriculum that are in our schools. So remember my example, that we can't just put this on the shoulders of a few to teach the necessary skills that everybody needs. So one of the things that we've been really successful with, especially with Botvin, is that we make it part of our, I'll give a high school example, our 9th grade curriculum. So everybody ran through the Botvin life skills curriculum in a class, and then the data informed how we positioned it on the teaching matrix to seep it into, right? And that was part of the fluidity. The other thing I want you to consider here, and we're going to start to talk about that as we dip into tier 2, tier 3. I want you to think of your social emotional curriculum in terms of dosage as we increase the need for some kids that will need more time, space, and support and time to develop out those skills and structures. We're going to think of it in terms of dosing up, right? So we're going to stick, and we'll when we start to talk about tier 2, I'm going to completely geek. I'm not having a geek moment right now, but I'm going to really geek out on translating that into action. But the key here is that everybody needs access to these skills, right? The social emotional curriculum is the core curriculum that everybody needs. And it just can't be a few teaching that curriculum. It's got to be everybody, all hands on deck, which goes back to that equal priority statement that's in the policy that I was showing you in Vermont. That's how we leverage our ability to say, yes, teachers, I recognize that you teach a content area, but if we're not paying close attention to these other skills, then we're not going to be able to get access to the instructional time we need to be able to teach.
I'm not super familiar with Botvin. Is that a program that can be taught just the skills that you need, or is it something that has to be from beginning to end?
So here's we can do this a couple of ways. So if you're looking at the true evidence-based practice and you're looking at these curriculums, they have been tested in a specific scope and sequence, right? So you can rely on that to teach across the year and rely on your scope and sequence for that curriculum. While you're doing that, you can pick and choose out of that curriculum specific lessons that you need now, because your data and your feedback from your staff and your families indicate that your kids need that, right?
Sorry, so I totally like the integration in all content areas. That's amazing. But my question is those who don't. Those teachers who say, that's not a standard, I don't have to teach that. Because
if you have college and career standards, then it is a standard, right? So college and career, so this is where you pull the college career.
Okay.
Pull out elements of your policy and show and demonstrate and link it to instructional time, right? Perfect. So your marketing plan, some teacher, you're gonna have the triangle for the teachers too, right? You've got 80% are willing to play along, 20% are like, whatever. And you've got some really, the interventions that are required for some teachers or such. But don't wait for their mindset to change. Ask them to invest in a change in behavior and track data to see if it makes an impact on students, and link it back to instructional minutes, right? Because the minute we start to translate what we do into instructional minutes and moments, is going to win the day for teachers, right? The cell will begin to emerge if you ask them to invest in very small changes along the way. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of that in a couple of minutes with respect to classroom.
Yeah, I'll hold. Okay. Who's next?
So our group talked about starting with the current school-wide matrix and reviewing it, hopefully prior to the beginning of the school year, adding in the SEL elements, and in addition, revising the ODR form, and the form of that is still to be determined, but to expand what's being collected on that form and change the name of it as well.
Great, great, awesome, thank you. Kelly, you just had a Donahue moment. Does anybody remember Donahue? Okay, no, thank you.
So we talked about really using different words to capture the same idea, because words are important, and changing we call it the classroom matrix. And we really haven't talked about how those matrices should be fluid, because I don't know that we knew that. And duh, they should be. And so we are going to encourage our teachers to, each year, as well as our school matrix, pinpoint, via Swiss what our hot buttons are, and then create a matrix to reflect that. And then, instead of calling it a classroom matrix, a teaching matrix. And we loved the slide that had like the stop, walk, and talk for the defiant or disrespectful behavior, I believe. Because we teach stop, walk, and talk in isolation, and it doesn't always transfer. So having it part of our matrix would be fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, very helpful.
So we worked on our matrix, but we like the staff expectations piece that we haven't really addressed that, to have that discussion with our students about here's what you can expect from your teachers. So we already started working on that and changing some verbiage.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
we have to sort. Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
No, I mean, big bang for your buck in terms of what the research tells us about teaching social skills. One of the most powerful ways to teach social skills is to model it, right? Anything you want your kids to do, we should be modeling. So I love the Guide Me part of that, because it seeps right into the kernels of evidence-based practices. So love it.
So came in late from lunch.
No worries.
The teaching matrix, and we're going to change the title of the ODR to what you suggested. And then we'd like to add that piece at the bottom of that, time out of class, that allows us to track, get some more information. And what else was there? Oh yeah, we're at the beginning of the year in the past. We have always done an all-school assembly,
Nice.
followed with the expectations for where you are in the school and what the behaviors are, expected behaviors. So we're going to be reviewing that. And then just the classic, fidelity piece with teachers just, using the language and carrying that forward. We'll also share with them what we've learned from these 2 days. When we get back, because we start a couple of weeks after our colleagues do, but it's all in the works.
Great. I love the staff pep rally, right? The staff pep rally. It, just getting excited for the next year and putting all those enhancements out there and getting everybody charged up and being really explicit about the way that we're going to maneuver.
The other thing we wanted to add was back to school night, talking to the parents about the innovation, this thing that we're doing, and kind of trying to put a different spin on it. Because right now they see it as PBIS, but they don't really understand it. And so I think the conversation that we've had these few days has helped us to kind of understand that, we need to kind of take it out of that framework and make it more kind of all-inclusive, global type thinking.
Great, great. Yeah, our way of work, it's really operationalized the way we do business in our school. And so again, the extent to which we can market it that way and not have it be held in a specific initiatives, but rather the fabric of our community is going to really help win the day.
Something that we had talked about, and I think it was spurred by the integrated examples when you have mental health built into Tier 1 and social emotional academic development and skills put in your Tier 1 PBIS matrix. Essentially, like, what stripe of the beach ball are we on? Are we talking PBIS anymore? Are we talking SEED anymore? Are we talking MTSS anymore? And it all seems very philosophical, but from a practical standpoint, we got to get our ducks in a row about, like, when we integrate, how do we package that from an SEA level? So that's where we spent that time.
Yeah, and you know, so many states that we're working with are dealing with the same issue. We really are. I'm fortunate enough to have been working with a California team, brand new to the state team this year, and I would recommend talking to them because they're doing some really careful analysis of making sure that the umbrella of MTSS sits in ESSA, right? So the new policy coming in. So,
the county offices that you were talking about yesterday?
So Orange County had the grant that created SUMS, the scaling up of multi-tiered system of support throughout the state, and they contracted out with a couple of counties. I was fortunate enough to work with one of the counties that we sat down, went through that material, and completely did an edit to create, I think, an easier approach to installation. And so I can put you in contact with that county office who was really doing the SUMS work. Yeah, so it was Santa Clara County, so Rhonda Beasley, Rebecca Mendel. So it was a rockin' great team, and I think that if you talk to them and talk through some of what they went through, they attach it to their LCAP. They attach it to differentiated assistance for schools and school systems that were in trouble. So it really helped. I think that would be very valuable. And I see a lot of states really going through the same kind of growing pains, and I think that's a good thing. It's really hard. The technical science to align is the most challenging thing in the world. So, yeah, it's hard. Okay, so any other remarks, comments, questions circling around in your head, maybe coming from some discussion at lunch before we keep moving forward? Okay, so now we're on item 1.10, and this might be helpful, these examples here might be helpful in connecting with some of the staff that might be resistant, possibly, or just another data slide that might show us how important mental health is in our lives. If you looked at the predictive link and school connectedness to mental health, it's significant. And the early studies suggest that there are substantial percentages of violent youth who do not perceive themselves to be liked by classmates and who report loneliness because they didn't feel connected to school. So when you're thinking about your teaching matrix, when you're thinking about your data, again, that social service lens and making sure that data is telling you these kids don't feel connected. If you think about the ways our brains are hardwired, we are hardwired to be social beings. And unless we experience feeling socially accepted by a group, we're not going to connect academically. Right? The whole reason our species survived was because of our ability to work and connect with others. And so it's an essential ingredient to how we see ourselves in the world. So this idea that connectedness and relationship and fostering care and connection with every single person that walks into your school is absolutely critical. We can no longer afford to say, they're not in my class, I'm going to walk away in the hallway because I don't know that student, right? The whole reason we have the acknowledgement system is to connect with kids. It's our prompt to adults to say, We need to be paying attention and fostering care and connections with kids. And so you should completely be fading out after a new skill's been acquired, fade out your external reinforcer. When you're starting to see connections that the adults have their 5-to-1 or 10-to-1 feedback ratios in some cases, right? You should be fading out your external reminder. When you start to see error patterns, right? You start to see mistakes getting made or new skill that needs to be acquired, back on your external reinforcer to drive and shape the adult behavior to pay attention to it, right? So when you see that ticket, it should be about, how do I get to know this child a little bit more? How do I connect with this person? And it's not just the boundary of my classroom, it's every single student that's walking in our building. So here's a high school example. We talk a lot about lunch. I feel lunch is like this huge social anxiety, and maybe because I've been in education much longer than I've been a mom, but my kids really suffer in lunch, and my kids are doing pretty well overall, but lunch has taken them down in middle and high school. So I like to focus on lunch, personal connection, because I feel like the data that's coming out also reflects that out. This is a high school example. They had an open campus, so not a lot of kids were experiencing lunch. And the other aspect, when they started to look at kids who felt connected and who didn't feel like they belonged, it came down to those who were participating in clubs felt connected, social clubs or social activities. Those in that high school that didn't have an opportunity to participate in clubs didn't feel connected. They also did a student focus group in this high school, and they realized that many of the kids that weren't consuming the clubs or activities after school didn't have transportation. So they nested the social aspect of the day inside the lunch period. And I know that changing a high school schedule is like an act of God, but they somehow did it. And now they have a 60-minute block of a lunch period. And it affords them, and this is a large comprehensive high school, so if you've got small rural high schools, you're gonna be like, oh, but this is a large comprehensive high school. Every staff is on deck. Every staff is responsible for one of the 86 social clubs that are available to kids. And the kids get to select, right? So NEST stands for Nourishment, Extracurricular and Clubs, Socialization While Studying, and Tutoring. So they also nested the kids that need that dosage, that increased support, they nested it here too. But they said, if you need academic supports, we're only gonna ask you to go to that academic support twice during the week. The other 3 times are yours, because you need to be socially connected too, and you need to have fun too, right? So students can go to a quiet room or do their homework, they can have extra tutoring, they can practice for HSAs, they can have their hair and nails done. They had a cosmetology department. They also had a technical center that wrapped around it. So they had a lot of resources here. But you get the idea that every staff member geeks out on something outside of school, so it fostered that care and connection and commonalities. And so teachers were working kind of outside their classroom boundary and getting to know a lot more of the youth. They had comic book club, gardening, yard games, and they also had a data tracker, the NEST tracker, that they were they were looking at data and switching things up according to what the data was telling them. So again, it's that flexibility and schedule, that looking at the whole systems lens to make sure that every kid feels connected. This is really easily done in a staff meeting. So in October, at a staff meeting, it would be brilliant if you could put the list of all the names of the kids that are in your school, in your staff room, and then over a course of a week, put a check next to the one that you've got a relationship with, and look at the kids that don't have checks or have very limited number of checks, and then kick it up a notch. Do a 2x10. Identify staff who will seek out that individual student 2 minutes for 10 days in a row and foster that care and connection with the kids that don't feel connected. It is that important. This isn't working anymore. Okay.
Is it on?
I don't know, I can't see. I love going blind. Okay, thanks. Okay. The other thing that about faculty involvement, and we've touched on this a couple of times over the course of the last 2 days, is staff wellness. Now, we're not going to be able to unpack staff wellness to the extent that we want to in the small number of minutes that we have, but I will say this. If you are a classroom teacher who didn't get access to the right skill sets as in your pre-service, that would be me, who didn't get access to the right skills in the orientation session before they were left to their own devices to figure it out, right? You're going to have you don't feel competent in your job, it's going to impact your mental health over time. And you're going to resort to things you never thought possible because you're stressed to the max, right? So in our training now, we say that Tier 1 is not in place unless classroom systems are evident and in place in 100% of the classrooms. And what we're finding is if you do a lit review of all of the best practices in classroom, it boils down to about 8 to 10 essential components of classroom management and classroom practices. And so we've incorporated that into our Tier 1. So I say this because if we're going to have staff be well, then they have to be competent and feel competent in the classroom. We also can't afford to continue to do professional development and say, if you do these 20 things, teachers, everything will be great. Here's a one-day professional development. Go be well, have fun, yada, yada. So we've orchestrated a different approach to installing classroom systems. So one of the things I like to do when we have an opportunity to introduce this notion to principals is I say to principals, true or false? Because I'll say, how many of you have Tier 1 in place? And everybody raises their hand. I was like, great. That means that you can walk across in your building and see evidence of this in every single building. And everybody kind of puts their heads down. I was like, okay, then you have Tier 1 partially in place. Now let's really work on the classroom system. And so what we're finding is that many of us don't even know what those practices are because we were never taught what these practices are. But instead of doing like that one drop-in professional development on this, we do skill of the month, right? So we've broken these out by let's focus on one thing at a time. So just like we do with students in our social emotional curriculum, and we focus on one thing at a time, we're going to do the same to nurture our staff to make sure we're all paying attention to those critical elements that we need to see in the classroom. So the first one is behavior-specific praise, and that's usually where we start. And if you're trying to secure buy-in with having a teacher change up their practices inside the classroom, then I suggest possibly doing something like this. Oh, wait. Okay. We all walk around with these phones now. In a staff meeting, have your teachers go over what behavior-specific praise is, and we'll do that in a second. But in order to secure buy-in, we've asked our teachers during a time when they're teaching a lesson, whole group instruction, record yourself for 10 minutes, right? But do this first. Predict what your feedback ratios are. When I was in graduate school, I had to do this, only it was one of those things that had 2 things that you press down. We didn't have phones. Okay, some of you get that. One of these days, there'll be nobody getting that. So here's what happened. I predicted. I was like, brand new teacher. I was like, my feedback ratios, right? I pay attention and give specific praise statements. I'm a 10 to 1. Come on, right? I'm a 10 to 1. So I recorded myself for 10 minutes, came back to it, collected my data, made a prediction, collected my data. I was at a 1 to 1. What I heard here were general statements, and I would repeat my direction in the kindest way possible, right? And I was hearing that as behavior-specific praise. And we are competitive, right? Teachers are generally competitive. So I was like, oh, if this is in the evidence and I'm not doing it and this will change student behavior, I'm going to make a goal for myself. So that's how we got the initial buy-in of our staff to ask them to engage and change in something that they were doing in practice in the classroom. So what we've done is we've created these cool tools. and we do skill of the month, and we start with behavior-specific praise. And this has infused a component of teacher wellness because teachers are telling us they feel more competent about handling classroom issues. They know what to do instead, and they're staying away from more punitive and exclusionary measures, which then creates the momentum of fostering care and connections for their kids, which then cultivates their ability to feel like they're being successful in their jobs, which then promotes mental health. Right? But we've got to really change the way we're setting in motion professional development for our teachers. And it's got to happen at the school building level to create the system so that there is an opportunity to gain insight about what the practice is, an opportunity to get performance feedback. Now, in some of our schools right now, we're setting up systems in grade level meetings where the teachers identify a data buddy to come in and collect data on them during the skill of the month. So they have control over how the performance feedback checks occur. This is outside of the accountability and the evaluation system, but really critically important. Questions, concerns, things circling around in your head? I just did a classroom session that's really a 2-day session in 5 minutes. So I get that I'm overwhelming you, but I want you to know that staff wellness is about feeling competent in your job as much as it is anything else. And we are doing a disservice to our teachers because we're putting them in circumstances and not giving them the proper skills and not giving them the proper supports to handle what we're asking them to handle in the classroom, and it's not fair. And it's breaking the system. We lose 50% of our workforce in the first 5 years. We've got to change the system to make sure we're nurturing our staff. So student, community, and family involvement, and then I'll give you time to talk. Big idea here that we've been really, you guys got, I think, and you have a plan for moving this forward. A couple of things, you can apply the same continuum logic to our families. And so we love this example. At Tier 1, what should we be doing for all of our families? In this school, they did a resource mapping specific to families, and they said, you know what, we need family engagement checklists, we need to install Family Screener, we need continuous skill building series on various topics. We need newsletters, resource library, and shout outs so they give feedback to their families and do shout outs. They had a data point where they recognized that many dads weren't coming in to have opportunity to volunteer. So they did a Dads of Great Students program, and they just had really short bursts of dads coming into the school for 10 to 30 minutes and walking the grounds with the principal and having kind of an informal chat, right? Something that really worked in order to secure that data point for this specific school. Teacher conferences where students are leading all teacher conferences was something that occurred with everybody. Family fun nights and the teaching matrix to promote the common language and connection between school and home. They increased supports for their military families and any students who came to the building that was brand new to the community. And they had skill building sessions for academic and behavior, and then intensive support. So you're applying that logic there across the continuum. Yes?
Something that one of our wonderful counselors did at one of our parent nights, he had parents and students sit down together and create a home matrix.
Yes.
On what is expected in the kitchen at home, in their room at home, different expectations and positive things so they could connect this matrix and that matrix.
It's as if I paid you to say
Nailed
that.
it.
Right? I didn't, by the way, but it's as if I did. This was my saving grace. I travel all the time, right? And so I always felt like when my kids came home, if we didn't have a teaching matrix to look at and go to at home, I was done. And it was beautiful because I even had across the top Target, because I spent a lot of time at Target when my kids were younger, right? And we had expectations when we went into Target. And I did all my pre-corrections right before we went in, to the point where my kids were like, I know, Mom, we have to use our #1 voices in Target, and we have to be patient when you're looking for clothes, right? But this is a lifesaver. If you're completely stressed out and it's 6 o'clock and nobody's planned dinner, you've got to have a go-to script so that you don't blow your stress moment with your kids. So this is absolutely essential. So I love that we're making that connection and using that common language and common script. Let's go one step forward, one step more. And if you're looking at from an equity lens, and I'm sure if any of you have seen Kent McIntosh, which most of you have, you'll see some of this in his work. But I love that in the beginning days of school, like the first 20 days, this might be something that would help you foster those care and connections with kids and have an understanding about the nuances between the differences of expectations between home, community, and school, right? We pick up on the context. We pick up on the nuances. I know that when I go to a baseball game, my behavior is going to be very different than when I'm going to church or when I'm sitting in a training, right? I get that. Many of our kids who make mistakes don't understand that context, and we might not understand what the family values are or cultural norms are as they enter back into home and community, and which is why they're making these errors. So this could be a really nice way to have a conversation and dialogue with your students if you're a teacher that doesn't feel comfortable in soft, mushy relationship and fostering care and connections, which many of our educators don't feel comfortable in. So I like this as kind of an intro into getting to know you in the first couple weeks of school.
What I was saying is I do an activity like this with my field students in our first semester together. And it's really about self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, if we're going to take a seed approach to it. And when you examine this, you say, what are my own, what's my worldview on these things? And it's not just about these sort of like in the different settings, but just in general as an individual. What do I believe about things like disciplining of children? What do I believe of, what's my take on religion or faith or those kinds of things? What's my take on time management? Mm-hmm. All the things that can be different, and then you talk about that, and you can do this with middle schoolers and high schoolers.
Absolutely.
And reflect on that, and then talk about, when I do this with my field students, my grad students, how might your clients be different than you? Where did that come from you? And how might they be different? And how do you use that to empathize and try to understand there are multiple valid perspectives involved, and how do you do that? But I think that for teachers to, again, be able to have a chance to step outside of their own perspectives, their own kind of values that they bring front-loaded mm-hmm. into their work, and help them understand that the kids and the families that they work with may be different, and whose job is it to conform with whom?
Yeah.
Or should it be a partnership and a
Right.
shared understanding?
Right. Awareness takes you so far when you can understand different perspectives. And so this could be something you do with faculty to start off with, and then the faculty then take it back, and in the first couple weeks of school, they're getting to know the kids, do an aligned activity with the kids. The other thing that I think is playing out, and I'm finding with 2 teenage sons right now, is, so you'll see this example. This is another activity that you could talk about and distinguish between what's happening at school, at home, and in the neighborhood. One of the things, because I actually was working on this and my sons were around, and we were kind of talking about how social media plays and has an impact. And there's a whole different set of social norms with respect to social media and the way we use technology that I don't understand. So look at this one, under respect. In my neighborhood, it looks like texting back within 30 seconds. So when I saw this side, I asked my sons, hey, what's the expectation in terms of showing respect? When you text me, what's the expectation? And they looked at that, they were like, yeah, that's about right, 30 seconds. I said, okay. It might be 30 hours, dude, because I don't think that, right? It's not as though I'm not, ignoring you, whatever. But then it took us into a really long dialogue about social media platforms. And I think that this could be really valuable in terms of bringing up awareness that I know I'm not a digital native, my kids are. And they work in a different atmosphere. when you guys were talking about how important language is earlier, I kept thinking about earlier this summer when one of my son's friends came to visit us. I literally spent 2 hours in the kitchen talking to them about some of the terminology that they use, and they would throw out a term and I'd have to guess what it meant, and then they'd roll over laughing and then they'd tell me what it really meant. There's a different cultural set of norms going on in the technology arena that I think is really important also to uncover. So there will be things that will surprise you. Yeah, we talk about, our bubble and personal space, and we talk about time, and we talk about all that. There's technology too that I think is infiltrating and could enlighten us as to why kids are feeling so anxious about going to the cafeteria, right? It gets to that. So that could be an activity to do. All right, so I'm having the same feeling I did before, that you guys need an opportunity to talk. So with that, I will give you 15 minutes to action plan around some of these items related to community and family voice and student voice, and let you action plan, and then we'll do a quick report out.